Hey, folks, it is Thursday, September 12th, 6 o'clock p.m. There are no commemorations for September 12th. It's the forgotten day. Something must have happened on it at some point in history, but we don't have September 12th commemoration, so I'm not going to dwell on it here. I instead want to raise my voice in irritation at the Meta Corporation and specifically the Facebook platform within it. Yesterday evening, after giving my monologue on Dogshirt TV and explaining to you all my new strategy of deterrence with respect to the Russian embassy and the protection of sunflowers, I decided I was going to write an open letter to Ambassador Anatoly Antonov of the Russian Federation explaining that there are, in fact, 78 sunflower plants in the Polina sunflower garden. And for every one of them that gets destroyed, there will be 1 hour of projection of sunflowers against the marble walls of the embassy. And so I wrote, if I do say so myself, the technical term is a fucking good letter. And I posted it to Facebook. And the first thing I want to say to Facebook is that I'm irritated that I was unable to tag Ambassador Antonov. Now, I understand that he has the right to block me. I really get it. I believe in privacy and settings and all that. But if you are the formal representative of a government in another country, I think there should be a mechanism by which somebody can tag you with a public open letter. And so my first objection is, Facebook, why couldn't I tag Ambassador Antonov in an open letter to him? I won't say it was the most polite letter in the world. It wasn't. But it was not, a tirade of abuse. It was making a serious point. Objection number one, very minor objection. I would not be monologuing on the point today if I had merely failed to tag Ambassador Antonov as a result of his privacy choices. But then something else happened overnight while I was asleep, which was Facebook took down my open letter to Ambassador Antonov. And I awoke this morning at an ungodly hour of the morning because I'm not sleeping all that well these days. And I woke up and I looked at my phone and there was a notice from Facebook that my letter to Ambassador Antonov had been removed from the site because it was misleading spam. And it was an attempt to trick people into accessing a website, which, by the way, it was not linking to any website there, except maybe my Substack. So the premise was false. It wasn't misleading anybody. It wasn't tricking anybody into doing anything. And if I do say so myself, it was a fucking good letter, not a letter that was trying to scam anybody out of anything. Now, I did send it to a number of people, so they might have been upset at the repetitious sending it by messenger to large numbers of friends who I thought would be interested in it, many of them Ukrainian, who had expressed interest at various times in special military operations. And I'd shared it with a number of groups. So maybe they objected to my conduct in sharing this thing over and over, but that's not what they said. They said there was something about the thing itself that was misleading and tricking people. So for the record, Facebook's position seems to be it is okay to be the representative of a tyrannical government that is slaughtering large numbers of people and to have privacy settings that prevent, by the way, this is an account in his capacity. It's not like, his sharing pictures of his cats or kids or anything. So your official account as a representative of an authoritarian government that's murdering large numbers of people, you can have a privacy setting that prevents somebody from tagging you. And if they send you an open letter, you can complain about it. And I assume somebody must have complained that I was sending a misleading piece of spam to about the Russian ambassador. And then Facebook will actually take that down. So fortunately, I assume this was done algorithmically and that no human actually made this unbelievably stupid judgment. And so I took advantage of the uh, um, appeal process, and I appealed it, and I reposted it in the form of a link to my Substack, which people here will be aware of. Dog Shirt Daily has the open letter last night. So they, fortunately, if you have enough different platforms, the Russians can't prevent you from exercising your First Amendment rights on all of them. So the letter still exists, and it is still on Facebook. It's just in the Facebook now in the form of a link to the Substack. But Facebook informs me again automatically that there will be apparently it normally takes about 4 days to handle an appeal, and it normally takes, but sometimes takes longer. So that's 1 day down. We're going to see how long it takes Facebook to correct this error, and whether, in fact, Facebook does choose to correct this error. But I do want to say that I am a little bit irritated about it. And I'm a little bit irritated about it because this was a letter complaining about the Russian government's efforts to regulate my First Amendment protected activities on my own native shores by destroying sunflowers, by ripping down posters, and now I suspect also by filing frivolous complaints, content moderation complaints with Facebook. And so, yeah, I'm a little grouchy about it. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. Even like we're not allowed, even when we try to deny the Russian ambassador the ability to have fun anymore, he can prevent us from having fun doing that. So fuck you, Mr. Ambassador, and kind of do better, Facebook. I mean, this one, you're better than that. I've given you a chance to fix it with the appeal. Just take care of it. We are, however, allowed to have Mike Pesca in lieu of fun. But I want to point out that Mike Pesca is currently engaged in he hasn't even said a word yet on the show, and he is already engaged in what Facebook would call misleading activity, which is that his title here says host. And Mike Pesca is not the host, he is the guest. So I am correcting this, and I am going to add cat eating host to my thing. Mike, I haven't seen your face except in pictures of you with hairless cats in a little while. It's super great to see your face. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I think the host was just a reference to the many microbes that are currently being trampled in my body like so many sunflowers outside a Russian embassy.
I'm sorry. What are you sick with?
No, nothing. We just all have microbes. There's so many ways in which we all are a host and a guest as at once.
True. And we are also in our own ways parasites on others.
Right. And we are dust in the wind.
In fact, that's all we are.
Yeah, some would say, including the apparently swing state of Kansas, if you look at the abortion vote. I think that no Haitian has eaten a cat in Southeast Ohio in many years. I do, however, think a cat has eaten, I'm not going to say a Haitian, a bird or waterfowl. So if in this game of telephone, someone does allege that there's some truth between Haitians are eating cats and then Haitians are stealing the birds out of the lake, and then you could say the cats are eating the birds, it'll somehow come true enough so that Lauren Loomer will claim vindication.
Okay, so I want to say, first of all, and this is not about Haitians, it's about anybody.
Yeah.
You want to eat a public waterfowl? I don't actually have a problem with that.
Really? Because I thought it was TLC who said don't go eating waterfowl. And I think they were right.
No,
A
wait.
public waterfowl. It's
Okay,
public.
hang on. Deer are endemic all over this region now. You can't walk down the streets in my part of Washington without seeing a deer. Venison is good meat. I don't want guns here, but you want to take a crossbow or take out a couple deer and eat them. Feel the same way about the Canada geese. With all due respect to our Canadians who may be joining us today, there are a lot of geese in the Washington area. Geese can be good eating. I just don't have a problem with sort of low-key urban hunting of overrepresented species, and so I just want to say I don't believe a word of this blood libel. But if it were true about the waterfowls, not about people's cats, because then you get into that's somebody's pet, right? But if some homeless person in the District of Columbia wants to have a venison roast, I got no problem with that.
Yeah, it's just right during duck season, some guy who will have gone to Cabela's will gear up in a bunch of camouflage, and that guy gets at least courted for his vote in the formerly swing state or the somewhat swing state of Ohio. But yeah, similar, if you're not attired that same way and you don't say it's duck season and I got my duck tags, you just want to eat some delicious duck, all of a sudden you're the bad guy.
Right.
I think not. I think you're acting like an American. It's a really good point. And also the whole thing about like when you eat the animal, you call it something else, like venison. I think if we call it waterfowl, it gives them more of an opening to eat it. If we call it ducks or quackers or liken it to the oboe and Peter and the Wolf, I think that was the duck. Then it gets a little personal.
Yeah, but I also think, look, if it's deer season and you're in some flyover part of the country, and people think it's completely acceptable for you to skip school and go hunting deer season with your dad, like that's normal behavior, right? What are you going to do? You're going to shoot a deer. And no one thinks that's weird. Nobody thinks that's inappropriate. If you're a homeless person in Washington, D.C., and you were to say, throw a knife at a deer or, grab one with your hands and cut its throat.
Which is much more sporting, right?
And also, the latter would have a chance of being kosher. Deer is kosher meat if it's shechted properly. You can't shoot a deer. That's why the Jewish food doesn't usually include deer, because even though they're kosher animals, because it's really hard to catch them and cut their throats properly. Hunting, you don't hunt for meat in Judaism. So, but if you were, say, a homeless person who did that, people would think you were psychotic.
Yeah.
And I just want to say it's the same thing. It's low-key subsistence hunting. And if we don't have a problem with it in one context, we shouldn't have a problem with it in the other. So go after the waterfowl.
They're asking for it.
They are.
Yeah.
They make a lot of noise, especially the geese.
It's not the low-hanging fruit. It's the low-flying ducks.
Right.
You could get them. Yeah.
Look, it's good. It's good meat.
Have you ever had goose? It's a very Dickensian food, right? I don't think I've ever had the fatted goose.
So I've had pheasant.
Yeah.
And I've had
under glass, or were you under glass by the end? I was pheasant under glass.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I've ever had goose. Have you?
I've not had goose, and I'm a big fan of exotic meats, and I've had elk and bear. I mean, at this point, is elk even exotic?
No, they're everywhere.
Right, but I will always go out of my way to have a duck in Chinatown, You're right. I don't understand when strung up in a nice row, and then when they pierce the skin and it sort of deflates a little bit. It's one of the most satisfying sounds
Yeah, okay. And
in
so
all of
why should
culinary.
we deny, right? We can go to Chinatown. I can order a duck on Uber Eats and it'll be here in 20 minutes.
Yeah, on
Um,
DuckDuckGo, even. Yeah.
right, right. Why should we deny people, urban free range acquisition?
Right. Right. Or just the whole, all these towns in Iowa and other places, maybe not Ohio, where so many immigrants come in and they work in the slaughterhouses, and we need
Right.
them to work in the slaughterhouses. And that is seen as proper. But when it's not a cow they're slaughtering, but actually, in terms of intellect, a lesser animal, a goose that an immigrant is felling for their own purposes, that becomes anathema.
So this is
Pointed to
my
inconsistency.
message to all of you out there. Go get your local waterfowl. Go get the deer, particularly the deer. Um, just do it. Learn to field dress them. And this should be part of the urban landscape in mid-sized small towns, and I would even say major cities.
You know what I think we need to get going? We need to start, and this is a real word, waterfowl, ducks, and so forth, but turkey, chicken, those are land fowl. We need to start calling them land fowl more. And then, of course, there's your jungle fowl. All the ecosystems have a fowl.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we need to. Well, I think just the idea that we should bring back the idea that you should eat the animal that happens to be passing by. That's like, and again, I want to exempt your neighbor's pets,
Yeah.
whether you are a native-born American citizen, an immigrant from any country in the world. We're gonna no evidence that anybody has been going for the neighbor's pets, but if anybody has, that's we're not saying that. But any non-exotic, overpopulated wild animal in your neighborhood that you can get your hands on, have at it, man.
It's what's for dinner.
They need predators.
Do you right?
We are the new wolves.
Yep. Do you think, and I do, I said this on my show, that you can always make fun of something that Donald Trump says that's wackadoo. Every week he has something. Most of them don't break through. People will forget that he ever had an obsession with Hannibal Lecter, just as people forget that, he keeps calling himself Michigan Man of the Year, or talks about all the eagles under windmills, or we go over 100 tropes that he likes to talk about. I think that the eating the pets is going to break through because 60 million people saw the debate, because it's the kind of thing where as people are making their decision, one will turn to another, maybe two people who didn't think they were going to vote or hate politics. They will say, did you see the debate? No, I didn't, but I did hear. And the one thing they're going to say is Donald Trump says they're eating pets. I think it's going to rival injecting bleach and good people on both sides as a utterance that is forever attached to him and will hurt him, like discernibly hurt him.
So, okay, let's talk about. We were talking about this yesterday with Tyler McBrien. We were trying to figure out what constitutes. How would we all have this impression that Kamala feasted on his flesh 2 nights ago,
like a duck on the pond. Yeah,
it was that it was a thing of beauty or a thing of fear and loathing if you are a Trumpist, but we all have the impression we know how it went. But elections are not won in pundit reactions to debates. They're won in actual votes cast, and they're won in and so how do you propose to assess that how do you propose that we figure out how big a magnitude win this was? Because let's say she trounces in 2 months from now, you won't be able to attribute the trouncing to this moment. So how do you figure out what the right amount, how big a deal this was?
Yeah. So The right answer will probably forever evade us. There will be a couple wrong answers that apply to the race. I was just looking at, because right after the race on MSNBC, one of the pundits opined this was the best that anyone's ever debated Donald Trump. I think Chris Hayes said that. And then Lawrence O'Donnell said something hyperbolic like, this is the best anyone's ever debated anyone. And he meant it. You know, in the history of debates, I think he was talking about only on TV. No one's ever had a better debate. So I was thinking of every city, state, gubernatorial debate where someone dropped out afterwards. And I immediately thought of the Rick Lazio Hillary Clinton debate, where Lazio like invades her space and she looks appalled and Lazio loses. And I looked at the polls. And so that is
and Lazio, by the way, who seemed like before that a presentable, articulate young man who was likely to lose because she was Hillary, but he was going to make something out of himself as a result of this race.
Yeah.
And then he just looked weird in that debate, and he just diminished and deflated. And I don't even know what he's up to or whether he's still alive.
I think he's skimming the ponds of Nassau County
for the turtles.
Yeah, you're right. And this was a time when the media had a much bigger ability to create an impression and foist that impression forever on you. So, you know, I'm sure, for instance, after this pans out and if Trump and Vance loses, people would a certain type of person would like Vance to go away forever, but he'll probably have a second act that Rick Lazio didn't. Yeah, Rick Lazio was presentable, up and coming Italian American outer borough candidate. So he confronts her with the signed letter. She's like, "What the hell are you doing?" He loses the debate. I looked at the polls and how the polls shifted, and the answer is they barely moved. She was ahead. She was ahead by around 7 points. She kept being ahead by the high single digits and won the race by, I think, around 13 points. But the whole story of that race is, you could say it's Hillary convinced New Yorkers that she was one of them, or Hillary did a listening tour. But in terms of electoral politics, oh yeah, that was the race that was decided when Rick Lazio confronted Clinton. There's no actual evidence for that. So that said, will this be the moment? I think what we have to do, and Nate Silver was writing about this today, is there will be polls that are already out, and they're pretty low quality polls. It doesn't mean they're not true, but real pollsters want to be out in the field a few days longer than the bare necessity. 4 days from now, all the reaction will be able to be culled. A couple days after that, it will be presented. So in 7 days, not from now, from the day of the debate. So by next Tuesday-ish, we'll start seeing polls where the effects of the debate will be priced in. And what I think will happen is, we did see all the polls that said that Hillary won, and Hillary won by a lot. And I do think we're going to see slight movement in the polls, 2%. And I think that the 2% nationally will be something like 2 or 3% in swing states. Probably not 3%, really, 1 or 2%. But I think it will have an appreciable effect. And when you say why, it will be this terrible debate. And what is the symbol of the terrible debate? Is there anything more symbolic than they're eating the pets? Is there anything? Is that the worst within the context?
I don't know.
No
we talked about this a lot yesterday, and actually the consensus was that the weirdest moment was that looking at somebody and telling her that she was promising to perform transgender surgery on incarcerated illegal immigrants.
Right. It seemed crazy, but you know where that comes from, right? That was was a CNN K-File report that posted 3 days ago. Andrew Kaczynski, headline: Harris told ACLU in 2019 she supports cuts to ICE funding and providing gender transition surgery to detained migrants. She checked it off in a box, but that's what she said.
Oh, interesting. So that story actually has a element of truth to it.
The only reason why, I was talking to Sarah Isgur today about this, and it has been fact checked as inaccurate, but the only reason is the verb that she supposedly, per Trump's utterance, supports, as opposed to she signed that and said she supported it in 2019.
Once
she hasn't
supported.
talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's
It,
never recanted her support.
no, I think she just she just allowed Trump to make the case that she once supported it, and everyone's like, "All right, put that in the pets file." But yeah, that really happened, and
Actually, that's
it was
interesting.
CNN reporting it that it happened.
All right. I want to propose a different way to assess victory, which is one thing that happened 2 nights ago is that 60 million people saw him ranting for more than 90 minutes, or for half of that time. Um, and it seems to me that a reasonable person looking at that would have at least the cognitive questions that we were all, in retrospect, rightly obsessed with talking about with respect to Biden. And so, irrespective of movement in the polls, it seems to me if over the next 2 weeks there's a whole lot of conversation about whether Trump is either cognitively incapable or just too freaking crazy, or a mix of those two, that his like a public discussion of that you can't talk about Donald Trump without it being an issue, right? Um, because if that becomes a thing the way it was a thing with Biden, that's a victory in the debate.
Yeah, but I don't think it'll be that thing because with Biden, the problem was he was being hidden from us, and then there'd be these utterances that seemed very problematic, and there'd be excuses for them. And he wasn't asked to speak off the cuff at all. You know, he didn't do a Super Bowl interview. He didn't do all the things that Ezra Klein and others talked about. With Trump, he can't shut up. He won't shut up, and he wasn't different in that debate than he was in stump speeches where he goes on, and his crowd loves it. So I talked about this today, and a couple points I made was point one is that it's a little bit different because with Biden, you're concerned, are they hiding him? With Trump, it's quite the opposite. They're putting him out there and he is what he is. So two is if you're saying the reason to vote against Trump because of his cognition or what he leads us to believe via his lack of verbal acuity and his tendency to always leave out the antecedent before they, that would lead one to say, oh, I don't know if he'll be capable in steering the ship of state. It's not different from I don't think it's appreciably different from when he was president. I don't think it's different from when he was talking about man, woman, camera, television. I don't think,
Have
I
you
mean,
ever
I don't,
noticed, by the way, the similarity between that statement and the pro democracy slogan in Iran?
I thought you were going to talk about the beginning of Ben Casey, but no, what is the pro democracy Iran
No,
slogan?
there's a slogan. Hang on, let me find it. The funny thing is, in one context, it makes sense. It's uh, it's gonna take me a minute to find it, but it's like 4 words, including the word woman.
Huh.
And if you just put it in the mouth of Donald Trump, it would sound deranged.
Is it woman, life, freedom? Is that it?
Yeah.
Woman, life, freedom. Yeah.
And man, camera, woman. Like,
Who's more right? So Trump does elevate camera as one of his
right?
fundamental
Exactly. It's one of the
building blocks.
fundamentals. Yeah.
Where is woman threatened more, in the world of Iran or the world of Donald Trump? This is a good question. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
so my point there is that, do you say, I'm not going to vote for him, or does a person say who's somehow on the fence, I'm not going to vote for him because I question his cognition? Or are they saying, or maybe they're not saying it, but they're feeling it, this guy is not making the case. And the reason he's not making the case is because he has poor cognition, or this guy's not making sense. He has poor cognition. This guy hasn't convinced me. He has poor cognition. I think people voted against or were worried about Biden because his lack of verbal acuity and cognition made you wonder about the kind of choices he'd make as president because they were different from what we'd known. Whereas with Trump, they're really similar to what we knew. And people were talking about this. I talked about this on my show. Stat News in 2017 did a report, Is Donald Trump Slipping? And they played reports, they played interviews he did with Larry King in 1987. And the answer is, yeah, he's slipping, because when everyone turns 70, they're not as loquacious as they are at 45. And when they're 52, they're not as loquacious as they were at 32.
I am 54, Mike,
Mm-hmm.
and I am going to turn 55 on November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day, Election Day. And I just want to say, turning 55 on the day the apocalypse either arrives or does not, and Britain has bonfires. By the way, have you noticed that they had their election on July 4th and we had fireworks, and we're having elections on November 5th when they have fireworks? It's like we're having fireworks for each other's elections.
How about that?
I don't think that's ever happened before. I'm about to do something that I'm going to tell you all, people on YouTube, I am never going to do again. Because the business model here is, you want to ask a question, you got to be a paid subscriber, you got to be in the studio. And so if you write a question in the YouTube comments, I'm not reading it to the guest. Okay, Andy? Except today, because Andy's asked a fucking good question.
Okay.
And
exceptions will be made for fucking.
And so, no, it's generally exceptions as a future matter, Andy, are not going to be made. You're going to have to press that button and come on and ask your question to the guest. But because you've asked a great question, I'm going to read it. Andy asks, I've been enjoying the gist since you restarted it, and it feels like you've been on a bit of an intellectual journey since you left Slate. I'm curious what things you've changed your mind about since then. So we're always all on an intellectual journey, but in fact, do you think you've been on a particular intellectual journey since Slate, or is the premise of the question right? And if the premise of the question wrong? And if the premise of the question is right, how would you describe that journey, and what are you rethinking?
Well, on my show, I was wrong about week, and I have notes on my phone to write myself notes about things I was wrong about. So I was on my show. Most of the things I was wrong about were, I think I bought into sort of I'd love to talk to you about this. We have talked about it. The most catastrophic or the most dire interpretation of Russiagate and Mueller, if you woke me up from a dead
Mute
sleep,
yourself, Richard.
If you woke me up from a dead sleep, I'd say something like, I know collusion's not a technical legal term, but I think there was collusion coordination. And I think now there's not enough evidence. There's no evidence to say that there was. So I thought that I've come to believe that the Russians had an effect, though a negligible effect, on the election, and that Trump certainly tried to get in the way of the investigation, and also that, because of his ego, he couldn't allow any other explanation for why he won. But I don't think that the Russians were as into him as I probably thought then. And then there are a whole bunch of other things where I say to myself, you and I have talked about this. We might be the only people who really care about the Nunes memo. But I look back at my coverage of the Nunes memo, and I was just knee-jerk dismissive. Not that Nunes is a towering intellect, but I think now I can say, there were as many flaws as the Schiff memo, which was held out to be the superior, more truthful memo than the Nunes memo. That is true. I think that is true. And there are other things of that ilk. So in general, I think that I'm a center-left guy, and I've always been a center-left guy. And certainly the last years at Slate, the Democratic Party had turned more left than center left, right? This is why Kamala Harris felt she had to check off a box on an ACLU survey that said, yes, we should give transgender surgery to migrants, which, by the way, doesn't get me upset at all, or I don't really even think about it. And I know it's not a big issue. So yeah, in general, I haven't become more conservative. I've been more able to self-analyze to see where I was right and where I was wrong. And people who've listened to the show and heard I was wrong week basically heard me saying that I was wrong about taking the more doctrinaire progressive stance or interpretation on a lot of issues.
All right, but I want to push you on. So those are some specific issues. But I think what Andy is picking up, and I also pick this up, um, and I want to say, I want to preface this by saying that you are an absolute model of how not to be radicalized when treated grotesquely by I don't know whether you want to call it wokeism or PC bullshit or
Social
groupthink.
justice fervor.
So whatever, however respectfully or disrespectfully one wants to be, your case was a grotesque case, and lots of people who have been less badly treated have had it radicalize them in significant ways, and you've been a real model of how not to do that. And so I don't say this by way of implying anything otherwise, but it does seem to me that you have um, a a more instinctive, okay, that crowd is all jumping to X conclusion. Um, uh, let's assume that needs to be zero based attitude toward things than you used to. And by the way, I don't think that's an unhealthy attitude at all. Do you think that you have become some people would call that contrarianism? Do you think that you have become more contrarian with respect to the left?
No, I try to guard against that, and I try to listen to the substance of their interview, their views carefully. I think so much is, and by the way, I challenge myself and I listen to a lot of socialists and I check in on um, people who are far to the left of me on especially economic issues and Andrew Tooze and Brunig and the Brunigs and people like that. And I get a lot out of it. And then John Gans, and then another podcast that I listen to is Know Your Enemy. Love these shows. They give me a lot. And I don't actually, when there's a real intellectual basis to it, I try to, apply the height of my intellect and see if it's working for me. It's just that when I was at Slate or when I was in the milieu of you're going to get rewarded for mocking certain people and you're going to get rewarded and it's easier to get a laugh. Like Colbert knows where he can get a laugh and where he might have to work so hard to earn a laugh that he's not going to earn a laugh. And that's not based on anything deeply intellectual. That's just based on the instinct of the crowd. I'm a person who wants to be liked. Plus, on my show, I'm also, a showman. I know where the audience is. So I never lied, but I kind of knew what would be the safe things to say that would be rewarded with applause. And there's a lot of intellectual fun to that too. I mean, when Colbert and his writers write a joke, he's almost always punching in the direction that you think he's going to punch in. But you got to think of the joke, and the jokes have to be witty. So that's how I think of if I'm contrarian. I don't think I'm contrarian. I guess a contrarian would always say that. But I think that before I was maybe taking it a little too easy on ideas that weren't great ideas, but were sort of on my side of things,
All right. Quick procedural rule for people coming on to when you pose a question, please default the mute button on, so that when I bring you on the screen, you don't your background noise does not show up in the conversation, and then unmute yourself at such point as I call on you, which I am now doing to the great Richard Wattenbarger.
Well, I don't know about the great Richard Wattenbarger, but I will, on his behalf, I will unmute myself now. So I want to come to the want to go to the question, which every once in a while is raised. Do presidential candidates lose the election because of debates? In other words, uh, and I know this is a kind of reductive framing, but I think back, for example, to Gerald Ford in 1976 with his statement that Poland is or Eastern Europe is not under Soviet domination, um, and, um, I'm curious about your thoughts about that in general. If there are if you think there are cases where, in fact, presidential candidates have lost because of the debates, I guess Nixon would be another example that people frequently point to. And what and I'm even though the polls we're still waiting on polls about this debate. How do you think that? Do you think Trump lost the debate? Lost the election because of the debate, or is losing because of the debate. And also, are there cases, the rare cases where a candidate might actually win because of the debate? And I'm thinking about Reagan in 1980.
Yeah. So the classic answer is that debates have a negligible effect. But why wouldn't that? But we look at the Biden-Trump debate that had a gigantic effect. It disproved or at least rebutted the conventional wisdom. So why can't it be the case, since we're living in many ways unprecedented times as regards to the media? Why wouldn't that be true even with debates? I think obviously a polarized electorate and people locked in and hatred, negative partisanship are such bigger drivers of, and just Trump being divisive are such bigger drivers of how people will be voting. But we're talking about winning and losing, the 2 or 3% in the 7 states, plus those special districts in Maine and Nebraska, which come into play. Yeah, I do think it'll move it a little bit. And I think this is an election about a little bit. So I think that's the Occam's razor explanation. Everything I've read indicates he lost the debate, and losing a debate usually has somewhat of a negative effect. And when it's so close, somewhat of a negative effect is bad and could lose some of the election. Then again, there's a lot of ground between now and the election. And if they're not going to do a debate, which just in terms of electoral theory is pretty bad if you're the trailing candidate. So Trump declaring he's not going to do a debate probably isn't wise if he is in fact trailing in the polls. I mean, other things are going to happen. And if Kamala, and another thing to think about is Hillary Clinton definitely won her debates against Trump and then wound up losing the election. So then, therefore, it's easy to say debates don't help the election or affect the election, but without them, she could have lost by even more.
I will just add to that that an election is a binary thing. There's no finishing second, right? You win it or you lose it. And in the United States system, it's winner take all. And so the debate is either it is not the cause, unless you're Joe Biden, of your not prevailing. It is Joe Biden this year, that is. It can be a contributing factor to your not prevailing. And the question is, how do you assess most voters who vote against you if you lose are not voting against you because you lost the debate or because they didn't admire your performance in the debate. And so the question is, how do you assess whether the marginal voter that caused you to lose, as opposed to her brother, voted for you to lose because of your performance in the debate? That is a completely unaccessible question, except by sort of clever sort of proxies to the answer to that, like movements in the polls, like a sort of a palpable sense that something changed in the direction. And so I wouldn't ever try to answer that question precisely. I would say, did candidate X help herself Yes or no? Did candidate Y hurt herself? Do I think she is likely to do less well as a result of her performance in this debate? And I think that's a sort of generally more effective way to talk about it, or more accurate way to talk about it. Alaric, it's great to see your face. I was in Rome the other day and peeping around every corner to make.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Ben muted himself. He took
Yeah.
his advice too much to heart.
Right.
Whoops, when did I do that?
Just as you were peeking around a corner.
I was picking around every corner in Rome to make sure that you were not there sacking the place.
Right, wielding some large bladed instrument. Right. Mike's great to see you.
Hello.
So maybe a lowbrow version of the previous question, pop culturally. Will the Taylor Swift endorsement matter? I'm kind of the opinion it won't move votes, but it might move young people to register. And if they register, they'll, bother to register. They'll probably bother to vote. And I'm just wondering if you think it will have any significant impact.
Well, to be consistent, if I said it's a very close election and everything with a little bit of an impact certainly could matter, I can't say except for the biggest pop star / celebrity on the planet. I did read that, is it vote.gov or whichever was the place that she linked to, got hundreds of thousands of new inquiries.
It's in the like 400,000 range, so all right, within the first day or something.
Okay, so now let's divide that. It's not as if it's going to be 350,000 to 50 about if it breaks for Kamala or Trump, but it could be very overwhelmingly for Kamala, but it's also not the case. I should say Harris, not Kamala. Although, since still to this day, people on CNN say Kamala, maybe saying Kamala is the greatest assist that I could give her. Yeah, so it won't be a net of however many 100,000s. Many of those will be in states where it won't matter, but you got to assume that a few young people who wouldn't normally be involved are now registering. Then again, she prompted people to register to vote at this point. Maybe they were getting around to it and this was the nudge she wanted to give them. I think it'll have a little, I can't say it won't have a little tiny effect. Remember, she also I don't know if you saw the documentary that she did, but her coming out against Marsha Blackburn was a big moment, I guess, for her and her independence and her family, but not for whoever it was that was running against Marsha Blackburn, because she won.
So I think actually I would only add one thing to this. The Marsha Blackburn case is a very, to people who think Taylor Swift is going to be decisive, the Blackburn case is a caution. Like, there's a limit to people actually tend to vote because of what they think, not because of what celebrities think.
Oh yeah.
That said, the 1-2 punch of Kamala Harris looking very appealing as a candidate, while Donald Trump looking nuts, and then Taylor Swift building on that within an hour with excitement generating thing. I don't want to be dismissive of that. And I think there is a lot of potential impact on voter excitement levels in communities that are going to tend to be supportive of her anyway. There's one other impact that I think is more hypothetical, but I just want to flag as a possibility. So Taylor Swift, the overwhelming demographic of her enthusiasts is young white women. And of course, there are others, but if you're talking about the demographic, this is a demographic that is largely going to vote for Kamala Harris anyway. So there's an excitement question. But young white women have have a number of things in common with one another, which is that they have older white fathers And that is the older male demographic, older white male demographic, is the demographic in which she is getting crushed. And so having sudden excitement among large number of these men's daughters, you could imagine that having a I don't want to say you're going to have like large numbers of middle-aged fathers turn to Kamala Harris, but you might have 1/3%. You might have people, having your kids excited about the person you're not going to vote for is a cognitive dissonance that, again, you're talking like anything she can do to push down white male hostility to the candidate. That is a really, really important thing. And so I do just flag that as, dissonance with your kids on voting is actually something that it matters to people in the sense of making them uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the divergence of men and women and conservatism, it's a gigantic divergence between
Yes.
18 and 29. Young women have become more liberal by the tune of 40%, starting from a baseline of 1990, and men, wavered a little bit. They were up 10, up 5, down 5. Now they're basically no more conservative, a bit less liberal and more conservative than they were in 1990. And the gap between them is something like a 40-point gap in self-definition of liberal and conservative. It's happening throughout the world. In places like South Korea, it's happening even 3 times as much as the United States. But this is an interesting, fascinating global trend. I will say the one prediction, you and I are mostly in agreement, it could have some impact on the edges. The one prediction that I'm certain will be wrong is I was listening to Megyn Kelly yesterday, and she said she can't believe that Taylor Swift came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. She said, good luck on selling any more records to Republicans. I think that Taylor Swift will, in fact, continue to sell many records to Republicans.
So I have a question for you about the Megyn Kelly thing, because I heard a recording of her reaction, which sounded frankly deranged.
Yeah.
And
I know what you mean. There was a lot of cursing. There was a lot of umbrage taking at
yes,
anodyne questions by the moderator, not even the flashpoint questions.
She seemed like genuinely angry that Taylor Swift would have the temerity to express her voting preference in a way that she, to my knowledge, did not seem angry at Hulk Hogan for doing the same, right? And she ended it by saying, but she started it by saying, I'm allowed to be angry at Taylor Swift. The implication being because I'm a woman. And then she ended it by saying, fuck you, Taylor Swift. Right. And I've seen many celebrities make endorsements. I've seen many celebrities express political opinions that I disagree with about all kinds of issues. I've never been angry at one about it. And so I'm just interested in your sociologic as a student of the American far right at times. How do you understand the venom that Megyn Kelly expresses at Taylor Swift for a perfectly appropriate, there was nothing inappropriate about what Taylor Swift said. She said, vote for who you think is appropriate, the right candidate based on your issues, learn about the issues. Here's who I'm voting for, and here's why. And there was the cheeky signed cat, the childless cat lady. But what about this sparks anger?
Yeah, and I have to say, I listen to Megyn Kelly often, and friends of mine go on the show, friends from the left, friends from at least the libertarian right, and she's respectful. She's smart. I have high regard for her. She's a very good broadcaster. We disagree on many opinions. She is the kind of person who will say when a fair point is made that rebuts her, she will literally say that's a fair point. In her election analysis, she had on Mark Halperin and Sean Spicer, but also they're doing a show with Tim Hogan, who's a Democrat. And not only did she let him have his say at some points, even though she disagreed with him and they disagreed, which is what I love and want out of a podcast, she said fair point. She did sound extremely angry, extremely unhinged. And what really happened? An American citizen, an adult, someone deep into adulthood, in fact, said, I'm going to vote for this person. You do however you would like to do. I mean, this is, in a way, it's modeling the kind of behavior maybe we want from most citizens, certainly most adults. Yeah, I think it speaks. I can't tell you what's going on specifically with Meghan. If this were something about that touched on her apparently deeply held Catholic faith and it was something about abortion, I could explain it that way. She also is very, very passionate about the transgender issues in ways that I frequently disagree with. And sometimes in ways where I think she does actually raise good points. This was a weird one. And I think she's getting, you hate to go with personal explanations, but the word unhinged and surprisingly venomous, this was a phrase that came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, particularly ever since I've been off Twitter, I don't see the day-to-day changes in, I said something nice about Katie Tur recently, with whom I have had a very, very good relationship when I was doing MSNBC.
Yeah,
And
because she's this really personable, kind person. Yeah.
Yes, well, she is a genuinely lovely person,
Yeah.
and I thought that she was among the very best interviewers on Russia investigation and related matters on that network or any other, and so I had very high regard for her. The hatred that came, like, it wasn't directed at me, but the shock and anger and hatred of her that came in response to a sort of generic nice statement that I'd made about her, I forget what prompted it, was, shocking to me. And, I don't know what the merits of any of the criticisms that anybody may have of Katie are. And because
But they're basically the people who got mad accused Katie Tur of being a shill for the right. This is the general sentiment.
Yeah, or that was the general sentiment, or seemed to be. But because I dip into social media exchanges so irregularly because I'm not on Twitter where it happens, most of it, I find that I'm I don't understand the directional momentum that things are going. I just see all of a sudden Megyn Kelly sounds like a crazy person and sounds like she really hates Taylor Swift. And I don't like, I have the feeling like 5 years ago, I would have seen something of the glide in that direction over time, and I would have some idea of where it comes from. And now it just like comes out of left field, and she sounded like quite crazy.
Yeah. No, this was surprising. I'm telling you, I listened to Megyn Kelly. I check in with her, of the conservative shows I listen to, which are the Commentary Magazine show and the National Review Editors Roundtable. I'll listen to her for, it's more of a show and more for a mainstream, less read in intellectual audience. I think she does a fair job, but this was a break.
All right. We have, because of the new regime in which Dog Shirt Daily begins on time and ends on time, we have exactly 90 seconds, 93 seconds. They're yours.
All right. I'm having on my show today on The Gist, I have Renee DiResta. Has she been in this forum?
So no, but Renee is a close and dear friend. And I interviewed her at Politics and Prose about that book, and I interviewed her on the Lawfare podcast about it. I think it's an extremely important book. I also think Renee is an unusually courageous scholar, and her treatment at the hands of Stanford University is a disgrace to the institution. And so I can't, I really think the world of her, and I think very highly of that book.
Yes. And so your interview, which I listened to by way of prep, is perhaps the best interview I heard. Maybe mine will be in that firmament. It's a full show interview. But what I'm going to do is in the next day or two on my Substack, which is Pesca Profundities, I'm going to give a full-throated defense of Renee DiResta as, are you ready? This is going to blow your mind, not an active CIA agent. Because her biggest critic, this guy named Michael Schellenberger,
Yes.
who in other contexts, I guess he's associated with people I'm associated with, and that doesn't matter. But he just consistently smears her pretty perfunctorily and pretty in an unskilled way as maybe she's a CIA agent.
And monetizes it.
Yeah, and monetizes it. And there is a case, and I get into the case. This is what the good thing in the interview is. I challenge her on some of the tweets that were flagged by Stanford as, is this really disinformation? Is this just normal political speech? Can't Newt Gingrich engage in puffery? She had good answers for that. We got to a better place than when we started. But this guy Schellenberger claims to be the defender of anti-censorship. And I'm an anti-censor, and I think that many times a claim of disinformation is wielded as a cudgel just to shut up information you don't like. That is not the case with Renee, and I'm going to ask people on my Substack and read it when it's up. I'm going to ask them to say, if you're trying to make a pronouncement, or if you want to know the truth about a question of disinformation, who do you trust? Do you trust the person who routinely, incorrectly smears another person as being a covert spy for the CIA? I would think that that would be a disqualifier, or at least put that person in bad stead.
I cannot improve on that, save to complain that you went a minute over.
Yeah.
Mike Pesca, you are a great American, and it is great to have you back. We are going to do this again, and look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you, Ben.
Talk to you later.
Enjoy the goose.